Absolutely. I'll keep the intellectual, psychologically grounded, conversational relationship, coaching qualities you want, while making the wording original rather than directly imitating Matthew Hussey's personal style. There is a mistake many women make when they really like a man. They become so focused on creating attraction that they forget to observe attraction. They think, how do I make him interested? How do I keep his attention? What should I text? Should I message first? Should I show him I care? And underneath all of these questions is the same assumption that it is her responsibility to keep the connection alive. But attraction doesn't work very well when one person is doing all the emotional labor. There is something psychologically important about allowing another person to invest in you. And I'm not talking about playing games, pretending you're busy when you're not, deliberately taking hours to reply, or withholding affection just to make someone anxious. That's not confidence, that's strategy, and strategy may create temporary uncertainty, but uncertainty is not the same thing as genuine desire. What I'm talking about is something much deeper, giving a man enough space to reveal what he actually wants. Because there is a profound difference between being available and being constantly available. There is a difference between showing interest and carrying the entire relationship. There is a difference between making your feelings known and trying to convince someone to feel the same way. Think about what happens when you do everything for a connection. You initiate every conversation. You suggest every date. You keep the conversation going when it becomes dry. You explain yourself when he becomes distant. You ask what's wrong. You try to fix the tension. You make excuses for his inconsistency. Eventually, you may have created something that looks like a relationship from the outside, but psychologically, you don't actually know whether he would have built it without your effort. And that's the uncomfortable question. If you stopped pushing, would he move toward you? That question tells you more than almost any dating tactic ever could. Because investment matters. When a person spends time, energy, attention, thought, creativity, and emotional effort on something, that thing begins to acquire significance. We tend to value what we actively participate in creating, not because people are possessions, but because effort creates involvement. Imagine two people building a table together. One person cuts the wood, measures everything, carries the materials, assembles the pieces, fixes every mistake, and finally calls the other person over to admire the finished product. The second person may appreciate the table, but they don't have the same relationship with it. Why? Because they didn't build it. Relationships work in a similar way. If you constantly build the emotional connection for both people, you may end up becoming deeply attached to something that the other person has barely participated in creating. And then you wonder why his feelings don't seem as strong as yours. Sometimes the answer isn't that you aren't lovable. Sometimes you've simply been doing too much of the loving work for both people. This is why giving someone room to invest is so powerful. When you allow a man to initiate, you're not testing him, you're gathering information. When you allow him to plan, you're discovering whether he has initiative. When you allow him to follow up, you're learning whether he thinks about you when you're not in front of him. When you allow him to solve problems and contribute, you're learning whether he wants to become part of your life rather than simply enjoy access to you. And this is where self-respect enters the conversation. A woman who has strong self-respect doesn't wake up every morning thinking, How can I make this man chase me? She thinks, is this man showing me enough that I want to keep moving toward him? That's a completely different psychological position. One position is trying to be chosen. The other is participating in the process of choosing. And the second position is where your power comes from. Because attraction becomes unhealthy when you start auditioning for someone's approval. You become hyper aware of everything you say. You analyze every text. You monitor how quickly he responds. You wonder whether you're being too affectionate, too independent, too available, too distant. And suddenly, dating isn't about discovering compatibility anymore. It's about performance. You're performing the version of yourself you think will produce the desired reaction. But genuine intimacy cannot be built on performance forever. Eventually, the real person has to appear. So instead of asking, what can I do to make him want me more? Ask, what happens when I stop trying to manufacture the outcome? Does he reach out? Does he make plans? Does he remember what you told him? Does he create opportunities to see you? Does he become curious about your world? Does he make an effort when there is no immediate reward? These behaviors matter because they reveal something that words alone cannot: voluntary investment. And voluntary investment is one of the clearest signals of genuine interest. Now, this doesn't mean a woman should become passive. That's another misunderstanding. You can absolutely initiate sometimes. You can tell someone you like them. You can invite him somewhere. You can communicate your feelings. There is nothing inherently unattractive about showing desire. The problem begins when your initiative becomes compensation. You initiate because he doesn't. You plan because he won't. You communicate because he avoids difficult conversations. You reassure him because he won't reassure you. You keep giving because you're afraid that if you stop giving, the connection will disappear. And if the connection disappears the moment you stop carrying it, that's important information. It may hurt, but it is useful information, because your goal shouldn't be to maintain a relationship at any cost. Your goal should be to discover whether there is a relationship worth maintaining. There is also something philosophically important here. Love cannot be forced into existence through effort alone. You can create opportunities for intimacy. You can communicate honestly. You can become more emotionally available. You can treat someone with kindness. But you cannot manufacture another person's willingness, and the sooner you accept that, the less exhausting dating becomes. You stop trying to control the outcome and start paying attention to reality. This is why the woman who creates space for a man to invest often appears more grounded. She isn't constantly checking whether the connection is alive because she's watching what he does to keep it alive. She doesn't need to chase certainty every hour. She lets time reveal character, and time is incredibly revealing. Anyone can be enthusiastic for a few days. Anyone can send beautiful messages. Anyone can make promises when emotions are high. But consistency requires something different. It requires intention. So don't confuse intensity with investment. A man can give you enormous attention for 2 weeks and very little effort afterward. Another man may move more slowly, but consistently make space for you in his life. Which one tells you more? The second, because genuine interest doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it looks remarkably ordinary. He calls when he says he'll call. He makes another plan after the first date. He remembers something important to you. He checks in. He follows through. He makes you feel that you're not constantly trying to earn your place in his attention. That's the kind of investment you want to notice, and once you understand this, you stop seeing letting him chase as a dating trick. You see it as something much healthier. You are simply refusing to do someone else's part. You can open the door. You don't have to drag someone through it. You can express interest. You don't have to convince someone to reciprocate it. You can give warmth. You don't have to abandon yourself to keep someone close. And that distinction will become increasingly important as we move into the other rules, because the most attractive woman isn't necessarily the woman who gives the most. She is often the woman who knows what she can give freely and what must be earned through mutual effort. So the next time you find yourself wondering how to make a man chase you, pause for a moment, ask a better question. What happens if I stop chasing and simply give him the opportunity to show me what he wants? Then watch. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for attraction is not to create more movement. It is to stop creating all of it. Building on the first principle, the next idea is where attraction becomes less about getting someone's attention and more about deciding what kind of attention is actually worth having. I'll keep it original while preserving the psychologically grounded, conversational relationship, coaching feel you're after. And once you understand that you don't have to carry the entire connection yourself, you arrive at another important truth. Knowing your value is not the same thing as demanding that someone else recognize it. This is where standards come in. A lot of people talk about standards as if they are a list of requirements you hand to another person. He has to text this much. He has to take me here. He has to say this. He has to behave like that. And while preferences are completely legitimate, real standards operate at a deeper level. A standard is not primarily a demand you make of someone else. It is a decision you make about yourself. It says, this is the kind of relationship I am willing to participate in. This is the kind of treatment I can accept. And if reality consistently falls below that level, I will make a different choice. That is a radically different mindset, because when you try to control someone's behavior, you become dependent on their cooperation. But when you control your own participation, you regain your freedom, and that is why genuine standards can be so attractive. They communicate something without requiring a speech. Imagine a woman who says, I will never tolerate inconsistency. But every time a man disappears for days and returns with a vague excuse, she immediately welcomes him back as if nothing happened. Her words say one thing, her behavior says another, and people tend to believe behavior. This is one of the most important principles in relationships. What you repeatedly tolerate teaches people what is acceptable in your relationship with them. Not because other people are always deliberately testing you. Often they're simply responding to the boundaries you've established. If someone learns that they can give you minimal effort and still receive maximum access to your attention, affection, and time, there is very little incentive for the dynamic to change. But when your actions communicate, I enjoy connection, but I don't participate in one-sided relationships, the entire dynamic becomes different. Notice that this doesn't require aggression. It doesn't require punishment. It doesn't require making someone jealous. It doesn't require saying, fine, I'll ignore you too. That's not a boundary. That's retaliation. A boundary is quieter. A boundary says, this doesn't work for me, and then your behavior follows. This distinction matters because many people confuse self-respect with hardness. They think that if they become less affectionate, less expressive, or less forgiving, they'll become more desirable. But emotional unavailability isn't self-respect. You can be warm and have standards. You can be affectionate and have standards. You can be forgiving and still have standards. The real question is whether your kindness has limits. Because kindness without boundaries can slowly turn into self-abandonment. Think about the difference between compassion and rescue. Compassion says, I understand that you're struggling. Rescue says, your struggle means I have to accept being treated badly. Compassion allows another person to be human. Rescue requires you to sacrifice yourself to compensate for their choices. And eventually, resentment enters the picture. You start thinking, after everything I've done for him, why doesn't he appreciate me? But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you repeatedly give more than you genuinely want to give because you're hoping the other person will eventually reward you with better behavior, your generosity has become a transaction. You may not say it out loud, but internally you're keeping score. I gave him understanding, now he should commit. I was patient, now he should change. I supported him, now he should finally prioritize me. But healthy love cannot be built on invisible invoices. If you give, give because it reflects who you are. And if someone repeatedly behaves in a way that violates your fundamental needs, don't keep giving while secretly waiting for your investment to transform them. Change cannot be purchased with sacrifice. This is why standards are so powerful when they are internal rather than performative. You don't need to announce every boundary. You don't need to threaten someone with leaving. You don't need to constantly explain what you deserve. You simply live in a way that makes your values visible. Suppose you value consistency. You don't need to say, a real man would text me every morning. You might simply recognize that inconsistent communication doesn't work for you and choose not to deepen the relationship with someone who repeatedly communicates that way. Suppose you value respect. You don't need to give a 20-minute lecture about how disrespectful his comment was. You can calmly say, I don't appreciate being spoken to like that, and then you observe what happens next. Does he listen? Does he take responsibility? Does he change? Or does he minimize your feelings and repeat the behavior? That response tells you more than the original mistake, because nobody is perfect. The question isn't whether someone will ever disappoint you. They will. The question is what they do when they discover they've disappointed you. A mature relationship isn't one where nobody makes mistakes. It's one where mistakes can be acknowledged, repaired, and learned from. And this is where standards become more sophisticated. A standard isn't necessarily, he must never hurt my feelings. That's impossible. A healthier standard might be, when conflict happens, we must be able to address it with honesty and respect. Now you're not demanding perfection. You're looking for character, and character is what matters. Anyone can behave well when everything is easy. The real information appears when there is frustration, disagreement, temptation, inconvenience, or disappointment. How does he behave when you say no? How does he respond when you disagree? Does he respect your independence? Does he become punitive when he doesn't get his way? Does he communicate when things become uncomfortable? Does he make an effort to repair things after conflict? These moments reveal whether you're dealing with someone who merely wants access to you or someone who genuinely values the relationship. And there's another psychological benefit to having standards. They reduce anxiety. Think about what happens when you don't know what you will tolerate. Every disappointing behavior becomes a debate. Is this bad enough to leave? Am I overreacting? Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe I'm asking for too much. You constantly renegotiate your own boundaries, but when you know your principles, decisions become clearer. You don't have to determine whether someone is a terrible person. You only have to determine whether the relationship works for you. That is an important distinction. Someone can be a wonderful person and still be the wrong partner for you. Someone can have good intentions and still be incapable of giving you what you need. Compatibility isn't a courtroom where one person must be found guilty. Sometimes two people simply want different things, and accepting that without turning it into a battle is a form of emotional maturity. This is also why a woman with standards doesn't need to convince a man to treat her well. She doesn't spend months explaining why she deserves effort. She doesn't negotiate herself downward because she's afraid of losing him. She doesn't think, if I become easier, maybe he'll stay. Because she understands something fundamental. Losing someone who requires you to betray yourself is not the same thing as losing something valuable. And sometimes the greatest expression of self-love isn't asking someone to choose you. It's refusing to abandon yourself while waiting for them to decide. That doesn't mean becoming rigid. Standards should have flexibility where preferences are concerned and firmness where values are concerned. Maybe you prefer a certain communication style. That's a preference, but respect, that's a value. Maybe you prefer someone who plans elaborate dates. That's a preference, but effort and consideration, those may be values. Maybe you prefer a particular personality type. That's preference, but honesty, that's foundational. When you understand this distinction, dating becomes much easier. You stop building an impossible checklist and start paying attention to the qualities that actually determine whether a relationship can thrive. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to force someone to meet your standards, you become much better at seeing whether they naturally align with them. You don't have to persuade, you observe. You don't have to threaten, you decide. You don't have to demand respect. You notice whether it is present. That is the difference between control and self-respect. Control says, I need you to behave differently so that I can feel secure. Self-respect says, I know what I need and I trust myself to respond appropriately to what I see. And that second position is powerful because it places responsibility where it belongs. Not on him to prove your worth, not on you to convince him, but on both people to demonstrate through their choices whether they are capable of building something meaningful together. So, don't turn your standards into a wall that keeps everyone out. Turn them into a compass that helps you recognize who belongs beside you. Because the right person doesn't require you to become smaller to keep them, and the right relationship doesn't ask you to repeatedly negotiate against your own dignity. Absolutely, this third segment should naturally build from self-respect and standards into the deeper psychology of emotional connection, without suggesting that women should become emotionally unavailable or make a man dependent on them. And once you understand that standards are not about controlling another person, but about deciding what you will participate in, you arrive at something equally important, knowing how to make someone feel valued without making them responsible for your entire emotional world. Because there is a very subtle difference between connection and dependence. And I think this is one of the most misunderstood parts of attraction. People often assume that if you want someone to become deeply attached to you, you need to make yourself indispensable. You need to become the person they cannot live without. You need to solve their problems, anticipate their needs, always be available, always be supportive, always be the one person who understands them better than anyone else. But there is a problem with that idea. When you make yourself someone's entire emotional world, you don't necessarily create love. Sometimes you create pressure. Healthy attraction doesn't come from becoming someone's oxygen. It comes from becoming someone they genuinely enjoy breathing beside. There is something deeply powerful about being with a person who makes you feel seen without making you feel possessed. Think about what it means to feel seen. It's not simply someone listening to your words. It's someone noticing the meaning behind them. It's remembering the thing you mentioned 3 weeks ago. It's recognizing when someone is unusually quiet. It's noticing the effort they made even when nobody else would have noticed. It's being able to say, I know you. I understand what matters to you. That kind of attention is powerful because human beings have a fundamental desire to be understood. We don't merely want someone who finds us attractive. We want someone who recognizes us, and there is a difference. Attraction says, I like what I see. Connection says, I understand something about what I see. That's why small moments of genuine appreciation can be far more meaningful than extravagant displays of affection. You don't need to constantly tell a man that he's amazing. Sometimes it's more powerful to notice something specific. I really admire how calm you stayed in that situation. I noticed how you handled that conversation. I like how seriously you take the people you care about. Those statements do something different from simple flattery. They communicate observation, and observation communicates attention. You're saying, I don't just enjoy having you around, I actually notice who you are. That can create a profound sense of emotional connection. But here's where we need to be careful. Making someone feel seen does not mean constantly studying them. It doesn't mean becoming hyper, attuned to every mood shift because you're terrified of losing them. It doesn't mean asking yourself, what does he need from me right now, every time he becomes distant. That's where emotional connection can quietly become emotional overfunctioning. You start managing his moods. You start fixing his problems. You start taking responsibility for his happiness. And suddenly, instead of being his partner, you're becoming his emotional caretaker. Those are not the same thing. A healthy relationship contains two whole people, not one person carrying the emotional life of both. And this is why maintaining your own world is so important. You need your own ambitions, your own interests, your own friendships, your own sense of purpose, your own private relationship with yourself. Because when your entire identity begins to revolve around one person, the relationship becomes psychologically fragile. Every unanswered message feels like rejection. Every disagreement feels like a threat. Every moment of distance feels like abandonment. Why? Because too much of your emotional stability has been placed in one person's hands. And that is a tremendous burden for any relationship to carry. The healthiest form of love doesn't say, you complete me. It says, I have a life that is meaningful and I want you to be part of it. That distinction changes everything, because when you have your own center, your affection becomes a choice rather than a desperate need. You are not saying, I need you to make my life meaningful. You're saying, my life already has meaning, and being with you adds something beautiful to it. That is a much healthier foundation. And ironically, it often creates deeper attraction, because people are naturally drawn towards someone who has an internal world. Someone who has thoughts, passions, curiosity, goals, standards. A woman who can spend a beautiful evening with a man and then return to her own life the next morning is psychologically different from someone who immediately begins rearranging her entire existence around him, not because she's playing hard to get, but because she has somewhere to return to. She has herself, and that is incredibly important, because mystery isn't created by hiding information. Real mystery comes from depth. A person remains interesting when there is always more to discover. You don't have to manufacture mystery by withholding affection. You create depth by continuing to grow. You read, you learn, you create. You pursue things that matter to you. You develop opinions, you experience life, you become more yourself, and then another person has the privilege of discovering that person over time. That is far more compelling than trying to appear unavailable. There is also something beautiful about allowing a man to contribute to your life without making him responsible for it. Let him help you sometimes, let him plan, let him support you, let him do something thoughtful, let yourself receive. This is important because some people become so determined to prove their independence that they never allow anyone to contribute. They say, "I don't need anyone," but that's not necessarily strength. Sometimes it's fear disguised as independence. Real independence isn't refusing help. It's knowing you can survive without it while still being willing to receive it. There's a difference between "I need you to save me" and "I appreciate what you bring into my life." One creates dependency. The other creates partnership, and partnership is where mature attraction becomes something deeper. Because eventually, you want more than someone chasing you. You want someone investing in you. You want someone who feels proud to know you. Someone who wants to understand your world. Someone who contributes to your happiness without being responsible for it. And you should want to offer the same. This is why appreciation is so important, not empty praise, not constant reassurance. Appreciation. There's a difference between saying, "You're perfect," and saying, "I really value how you handled that." The first is vague. The second is meaningful. The first can become routine. The second tells someone that their specific qualities are being recognized. And recognition creates intimacy, but again, don't confuse appreciation with approval seeking. You don't need to constantly validate a man so that he'll stay. You don't need to become his biggest fan club. You don't need to applaud every decision he makes. Sometimes the deepest form of respect is honesty. You can admire someone and still challenge them. You can love someone and still disagree. You can support someone without enabling them. In fact, genuine connection requires enough security for truth to exist. If you are terrified that telling someone the truth will make them leave, then you're not really relating to them freely. You're managing them, and the goal is not to manage a relationship into survival. The goal is to create a relationship where both people can be authentic. So when you make a man feel seen, don't ask yourself, "How can I make him feel so good that he becomes addicted to me?" Ask something more meaningful. "How can I understand this person while remaining fully myself?" That question protects both sides. You don't disappear into him. He doesn't have to disappear into you. You meet, and that meeting is where intimacy begins. Because the strongest relationships aren't built between two incomplete people desperately trying to complete one another. They're built between two people who have developed enough of a relationship with themselves that they can enter a relationship without abandoning themselves. And that is why the woman who has her own life can often create a different kind of attraction. She can listen without losing herself. She can care without rescuing. She can appreciate without worshipping. She can be vulnerable without becoming dependent. She can love deeply without making love her entire identity. And when a man experiences that, something changes. He doesn't simply feel that she wants him. He feels that she has chosen him, and being chosen by someone who could stand perfectly well without you carries a different psychological weight. Because desire becomes meaningful when it contains freedom, you don't want someone beside you because they have nowhere else to go. You want them beside you because, among all the places they could go, they genuinely want to be here. That is the kind of love worth building. So give a man the experience of being seen. Notice him, appreciate him, listen to him, celebrate what is genuinely admirable in him. But never make the mistake of believing that loving him requires losing yourself. Keep your world, keep your curiosity, keep your purpose, keep the parts of you that existed before he arrived. Because the goal isn't to become the woman he cannot live without. The goal is to become a woman who can love deeply without ever needing to abandon herself.